I have never seen anything like what has just happened in the Oval Office. I think it's a catastrophe for the United States, for Ukraine, for Europe, for the free world. Trump and Vance have come down on the side of Russia unequivocally. And I think it will have extremely adverse consequences for the United States and its alliances and friendships around the world. This is a historical reversal. I think we could see it coming, but now we've seen it in completely unvarnished tones. I think this is a sad moment to see that happen in the Oval Office. Well, let's distinguish who we're talking about here. I don't think the United States is stepping back from anything. I think what has happened is that Vance and Trump have stepped back. They have sided with Russia, America's adversary, against essentially all of our allies in Europe, and against the people of Ukraine, who for 3 years have been fighting off unprovoked Russian aggression. That's why this is such a sad day for the United States and for its alliances around the world. But I want to be very clear here. I do not believe that what Trump and Vance have said in this extraordinary, unprecedented attack on the leader of a friendly state represents anything like the majority opinion of American citizens. I think it's their opinion. And I don't know how this will play out. It's so unprecedented. I don't think anybody can predict. But I think everybody should be clear who owns what just happened in the Oval Office. Trump and Vance own it. The American people do not. Well, I think people need to keep this in perspective. I understand exactly what Trump and Vance are saying, and I understand why people around the world are worried about it. I'm worried about it too. But history is a long time. It's not just one president. We'll see what happens in the next days politically in the United States. I think Trump has made a huge political mistake from his own perspective here. I think this may be what finally causes Republican members of Congress to stand up and say Trump doesn't represent their opinions. We'll have to see. But I firmly believe that the average American does not want to be on the same side as Russia and North Korea in this conflict.
You're someone that has spent a lot of time with Donald Trump, knowing his personality, knowing how he works with these big leaders. How do you think Keir Starmer should act towards Donald Trump in order to mend the relationship between the two countries, which is quite divisive right now?
Well, I think it's not a guaranteed way to succeed, but it's usually pretty likely to, is flatter him. Tell him how wonderful he is. Appeal to his ego, which is enormous. And again, as with Zelensky, explain why what you want, whatever Keir Starmer wants, Trump can be made to understand it will make him look good. Doesn't care about enhancing British security, doesn't really care about enhancing American security, cares about enhancing Donald Trump. This is hard for people to understand. It was hard for me to understand that he didn't think in policy terms, that he didn't have any kind of overarching concept what he thinks America's place in the world is. It's about Donald Trump's place in the world, and people should approach it that way. If the objective is to get to the right result, then just think up an argument that you wouldn't make with any other leader in the world, but you could make with Donald Trump because you would be playing to his ego.
Well, in that sense, John, is it fine to say that the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine will only be brokered because Donald Trump wants to get this done for his legacy, to say that he did this, whatever the outcome is?
Sure, he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He has been upset ever since 2009 when Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize, and to an extent with good reason. Barack Obama didn't deserve the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. He had only been in office for a few months when the Nobel Committee made the decision. It was ridiculous. It was a joke for the Nobel Peace Prize itself. But in Trump's mind, he should have it. If Barack Obama got it, why shouldn't Trump have it? And he convinced Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sure Abe laughed as he signed the nomination because he knew it wasn't going to happen. Look, part of this is he experiencing cognitive decline, or was he always at the level he's at now? And I would tend toward the latter view. I didn't think he was fit to be president when he was in. I don't think he's fit to be president now. He doesn't have the basic knowledge that presidents have to have. He has no interest in learning, and he doesn't read any briefing papers or anything like that. So, whether he's declined or not, he's not up to the job. And but that doesn't bother his supporters, unfortunately. And I think it's one of the reasons why he's such an easy mark for people like Vladimir Putin, who know how to manipulate him, and he doesn't even realize he's being manipulated. He said of Kim Jong-un of North Korea, we fell in love. Well, I can guarantee you that's not what Kim Jong-un thinks, but it's a way for them to get what they want out of Trump while he's trying to make sure that he doesn't disrupt the friendship that he thinks he has with him. Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un all believe that they know how to manipulate Trump. They know he doesn't know very much. He doesn't care to know very much. He cares only about personal relations. He thinks everything in life is just another deal to be made. He doesn't have a grand strategy. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't really even do policy. They're considering how they're going to take advantage of Trump in office. Much of what Trump has said about Zelensky has been Russian propaganda. I remember in 2019, soon after Zelensky was actually elected, Trump had a conversation with Putin that I listened in on because that's part of my job, is to listen into all his conversations with heads of state. And Putin was deriding Zelensky. He said, we know him well in Russia. We watch his TV show with subtitles. He's an okay comedian. And it went on like that. And you could see Trump just eating it up, because here he had Putin criticizing Zelensky, with whom he had the famous perfect phone conversation that led to Trump's first impeachment. And it goes back to Trump thinking, if I have good relations with somebody, the U.S. has good relations with the country, and if I have bad relations, the countries have bad relations. He still thinks somewhere in Ukraine, Hillary Clinton's computer server is being hidden that was used against him in the 2016 campaign. He's never gotten on with Zelensky because of the impeachment. I give Zelensky a lot of credit. He's tried very hard over the past 6 months to develop a relationship with Trump. From what I can see, I don't think he's succeeded.
In the last 4 weeks since he's been president, John, and saying that his brain is kind of full of mush right now, whether or not he should take a cognitive exam, is there anything specific moments that you've been watching on thinking you're not all there?
Well, I think he's not there in the sense he doesn't appreciate what it means to act at the international level. His fascination with authoritarian figures, I think, is because he sees them as big guys, decisive. They're strong people, and he wants to be like them. And I would say there's something wrong with somebody who's president of the United States who thinks they have to compare themselves to anybody else. But Trump is constantly doing that.
We are joined by John Bolton by phone. He was National Security Advisor to Donald Trump during the events that led to Trump's first impeachment. John Bolton, hello. I want to play some sound that you and I were talking about. This is Marco Rubio and others on Putin and Zelensky before today's Oval Office ambush.
Russia is governed today by a gangster. He's basically an organized crime figure who controls a government in a large territory. There's no other way to describe Vladimir Putin.
I think this entire invasion has been irrational. It's hard to understand what is actually being fed into Putin in terms of intelligence and reporting and how much of his own propaganda he believes.
What's at stake is repelling an authoritarian who basically is saying, I want the Soviet Union back, I want Ukraine back, I want Kiev back. And then what's at stake is making sure we don't allow it to become an Article 5 larger, broader war than that.
John Bolton, your thoughts on folks, some of whom I imagine you know pretty well, today turning on a stalwart American ally fighting a clearly defined and understood American adversary.
Yeah, this is really one of the most disgraceful performances that I've seen, and I think it's important to understand that, in particular, Trump and Vance own this personally. This is the kind of attack on a country that's defending itself from an unprovoked aggression, and they just unleashed on Zelensky in public. I am concerned that the president, vice president of the United States have sided with the aggressor, with, as Mike Waltz was just saying there, somebody who's trying to recreate the Russian Empire, something he's been very clear about since 2005 at least. And now you have, sadly, both Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio in the administration. This is the point when somebody does 180 degrees from understanding American allies to backing America's adversaries that you resign.
Mark, are you saying Marco Rubio should resign?
And Mike Waltz. This is really the time to do it. If they don't get out now, I think their reputations will suffer for a long, long time. And that would be sad, because their record in believing in a strong American national security policy has been very good up until now.
I mean, let me show you what Lindsey Graham had to say literally 12 days ago to Zelensky's face, and then I'll show you some of what he had to say today.
I want to tell you and your people, you're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. Not one American has died defending Ukraine. You've taken our weapons and you've kicked their ass. And I'm very proud to have you as our ally. So, what do I think? Complete, utter disaster. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
John Bolton, what do you think of Lindsey Graham right now?
It just, this is a line that the White House must have put out. It is Zelensky who is standing up for a country that only is asking for its independence and freedom to be preserved. Trump has said Zelensky is a dictator who provoked the war. It's an alternative universe. What you heard from Trump and Vance today was advancing the Russian position in these negotiations.
I want to see if John Brennan agrees with you. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess this might be an instance in which that is the case, John Brennan.
I've been agreeing with John Bolton regularly over the past several years, because I think he saw up close and personal the damage and the danger that Donald Trump presents to our national security. It is clear from today's events that either Trump and Vance are ignorant of world history or are intentionally ignoring it. And their naivete when it comes to Russia and their amateurish attitude in terms of diplomacy, it really just worries me. And I think it worries John Bolton. It worries a lot of people who have worked over the years to try to keep this country strong, safe, and prosperous. But Donald Trump looks at the world through a very transactional, mercantilist prism. And I fear what he's doing is carving up the world into spheres of influence. And he's basically saying to Vladimir Putin, okay, you can have Ukraine, you can have the eastern part of Europe. And it does send a very chilling message to all of our allies and partners. And what message does it send to President Xi of China? We're not really going to care about the Taiwan. And, if we make a deal, he prides himself on being a deal maker, but he just throws to the side all of the many years of American values and principles that really have undergirded global stability and security. And Donald Trump in this meeting today, I think, demonstrates he's not interested in that. He is interested in only doing what it is that he believes as a real estate developer needs to get done. And it's atrocious, it's despicable, and things that Lindsey Graham says, spineless, unprincipled, and again, despicable.
Donald Trump refused to say whether he thought Vladimir Putin was a dictator. And then in his first cabinet meeting yesterday, he said that Putin was smart and cunning, and continued to say that the war wouldn't have happened if he was president at the time. How dangerous do you think this kind of complimentary language is that Donald Trump uses about Vladimir Putin, or I guess the lack of condemnation?
Well, I think it's very, very serious, and it's a huge mistake for the United States and for the West as a whole. And you can see by the comments that he's made, by the actions the United States has taken, voting in the United Nations against a resolution condemning Russian aggression, U.S. voting alongside Russia, North Korea, Belarus. Even China didn't vote with Russia. They abstained on that resolution. So we're on the opposite side of the NATO alliance as a whole. And it's bad news for Ukraine, bad news for Ukraine's prospects, but bad news for NATO, too, as he consistently drives wedges between the United States and its allies. And I don't see that diminishing. I've said for quite some time I'm very worried that Trump would completely withdraw the United States from NATO. He came close to it in 2018. He might well do it this time, or he might take steps that so weaken NATO that by the time he actually withdrew, it would just be a formality.
What was your reaction, your immediate reaction to when you saw the United States voting with Russia at that UN General Assembly?
Well, it was disgraceful. I mean, it's contrary to reality. It buys the Russian argument that NATO provoked the war by talking about Ukrainian membership. In fact, that's been the United States position since 2008, when George W. Bush proposed to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO on a fast track. So if that were provocative to Russia, one wonders why they didn't attack Ukraine before, why they waited to 2014 and then again in 2022. NATO has nothing to do with this. This is part of the design that Vladimir Putin has stated openly and publicly since 2005, when he said the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He's trying to put the Russian Empire back together again. Ukraine is a big part of that in his mind, and many, many other Russians. This is not just Putin's war, it really is a Russian war. And if you can't see that, then you're blinded to the steps you need to take to resist the aggression and to try and deter future aggression, whether it's by Russia in Europe or by China along its Indo-Pacific periphery.
Where do you see the state of the alliance right now, John, between Europe and the United States after a pretty insane few weeks?
Well, I think it's in trouble, and I think it's important for, particularly for NATO members who are also in the European Union, not reflexively to say, well, we can't count on the United States, we'll just have the European Union worry about defense. That isn't going to happen. That isn't enough. There's going to be a long period here of having to grit your teeth and bear with Donald Trump, try and distract him so he doesn't do more damage to NATO, in the hopes that when he disappears, he is an aberration and that we will snap back to a more normal policy.
This week, John, Trump unveiled a plan for selling a gold card visa, which would cost about $5 million and would essentially allow anyone wealthy to be able to purchase a permanent residency, which would in turn lead you on the path to citizenship in the United States. Now, a reporter asked Trump whether Russian oligarchs would be eligible to purchase a $5 billion gold visa, to which he kind of laughed and said, well, I don't know, possibly I know some pretty nice oligarchs. What was your reaction to this? It is such a bizarre backflip.
Right. Well, there are oligarchs, many of whose assets in Russia have been seized, who are not pro-Putin, but there are also a lot of them that still are pro-Putin. I'd like to know the ones he knows and why he thinks they're such good folks. And it will undoubtedly feed speculation about what exactly it is the oligarchs have on him.
Tomorrow, as you mentioned, President Zelensky will be visiting the White House, where he said that he's set to sign this $500 billion minerals contract with Donald Trump. The problem being is that there is concern the contract doesn't include enough security for Ukraine from the United States. What kind of protection should Zelensky be asking for tomorrow when he meets with Donald Trump?
Well, I think this particular agreement, we don't know the details. I mean, there have been leaks of pieces of it. I must say, it sounds to me more like it's an agreement to agree. That is to say, there's not much in it. And it saves face for both Trump and Zelensky. The $500 billion figure, for example, is apparently not in the deal, which is what Trump was saying. So substantively, I'm not sure what this piece of paper they're going to sign will do. I think it's cosmetic and political for both of them. But if Zelensky, based on what happened with Macron and Starmer, is still of a view that he doesn't have a prospect of adequate security guarantees, particularly from the United States, that's going to be his central pitch to Trump. And I'm worried that he's going to fail, as I think Macron failed and Starmer may fail. As Trump said in his cabinet meeting yesterday, he thinks it's mostly for Europeans to make the security guarantees, which is evidence of a mindset that thinks that Europe's a long way away from the United States, and what happens in Europe, it's like Neville Chamberlain talking about Czechoslovakia as a faraway country, which obviously it wasn't. Zelensky needs to find a way to appeal to Trump's ego, because that's always what's uppermost on Trump's mind. Don't talk about Ukraine security. Talk about what will benefit Donald Trump, what will enhance his reputation, and why selling out to Russia will harm his reputation, which it will in history, even though I'm quite sure at this moment Trump doesn't see that.
When it came to the 2024 presidential election, John, it was a hotly contested subject about how much aid the United States was sending, how much protection they were giving to Ukraine. Do you think that Donald Trump is basically keeping that in mind, that perhaps America does feel like this is Europe's problem, it's Europe's doorstep that Ukraine is on? So why would America have to always come to save other countries in strife?
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt Europe should be doing more. Britain has really been in the lead within Europe. Germany and others in what Donald Rumsfeld called old Europe really have not. Poland, the Baltic republics have been very forthcoming in helping Ukraine. But, the real question is, what's in America's interest? And it's been in our interest for a long time to have peace and stability in Europe for economic reasons, for our own security. That's what we get out of the NATO alliance. And it's not something you can say, well, we'll let the Europeans do it, and if they fail or if Ukraine fails, we don't care. We do care. If Russia comes to dominate Ukraine, it poses a bigger threat elsewhere in Europe to countries that are NATO members, to our economic interests, to a whole range of political and military interests. World's a complicated place. Donald Trump doesn't get the complications. Europe's right there with Ukraine, so it's Europe's problem. Sounds easy and straightforward. It's just completely wrong.
Looking at the situation in the United States right now, if you had to nail down one thing, what do you think is the biggest national security threat facing the United States today?
Well, I think right now it's China and what they're up to, whether they will make a play at Taiwan, whether they'll do something else in the South China Sea, something along their land borders with Vietnam or India. I think it's a country that has hegemonic aspirations in its region in the near term, and you can see that by its more aggressive behavior toward Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and others. I don't think we're thinking enough about it. I think we need to do a lot more to be prepared. And I think Europe needs to do a lot more about it, because as this China-Russia axis comes together, you're going to find that what happens in Asia doesn't stay in Asia, and what happens in Europe doesn't stay in Europe.
Do you have any inclination of how long you think that we'll be going before we get the end of this war?
Well, I don't think there's any sign from Zelensky that he's about to make concessions. I think much of what's happened in the past couple of weeks since Trump's inauguration has actually strengthened Zelensky's position in Ukraine. I think the people are more determined to resist. And let's not forget about Moscow. Trump has already given them big chunks of the positions they wanted, giving up on restoring Ukraine to full sovereignty and territorial integrity, removing the possibility of NATO membership, essentially removing the possibility of U.S. participation in security guarantees. So in the Kremlin, they're sitting around thinking, good grief, we didn't ask for enough, let's ask for more. So their position is actually toughening because they think that Trump will, in order to make the deal, will go out of his way to provide additional concessions. So I don't think the path of these negotiations will be even, and I don't think it will be quick. Ronald Reagan must be turning over in his grave that an American president can say, yeah, I'll trust Vladimir Putin. Trump said a few days ago that he says he wants peace, and I believe him. Well, of course he wants peace. He wants peace. He also wants all of Ukraine. It's just embarrassing that we're being led into these negotiations by that kind of attitude. the Ukrainians are the ones whose territory has been invaded. They're the victims of the invasion. They're the ones that are dying to defend their territory. So I'm glad Mr. Humanitarian Donald Trump cares about the loss of life. You might ask the people who have been brutalized by the aggressors, if they're still willing to fight, what problem do we have with that? As far as the potential of a mineral deal, as I say, for Zelensky kind of giving in to Trump under the pressure, maybe the concession he needs to make. But this idea that somehow American investment in Ukraine will help secure the future for Ukraine, you know, people ought to go back to a book written by Norman Angell in about, 1910 somewhere, called The Great Illusion, where he said Europe is so economically integrated, there's so much trade and investment that the cost of war would be so bad there will never be war on the European continent again, which was a prediction that lasted right up until 1914 when World War I broke out. So the idea that our investment in Ukraine will somehow deter the Russians is false. Moreover, just one small point on Donald Trump. Have we ever known him to keep a deal that long? That's why Zelensky says, I want assurances that will outlast both Trump and Putin. Public opinion in Ukraine wants to continue the war because they don't want 20% of their country to be taken over by an invader. Imagine the American Revolution. If somebody said, come on, you know, New England is free, New York, the Middle Atlantic states, you don't need the South. Let it go. Let the British have that. How would we have reacted to that? Ask George Washington. This is something the Ukrainians feel they have been wrong. They want to live in an independent country. We haven't pushed them. We haven't propagandized them. We haven't asked them to take any position at all. What they said was, and continue to say, we're going to resist this aggression.